Wanted to introduce myself. My name is Andrew Simmons. I'm the head coach at Lifelong Endurance. We focus on triathlon endurance sports like running, ultramarathons, marathons. Personally, I am the head running coach at Lifelong Endurance, and I work with some pretty awesome athletes, athletes that range from 400 to 800 meter runners, all the way up to 200 plus mile multi-day stage events. I really love the sport of endurance running. I have a certification from USA Track and Field, level 2 coach. So this is kind of our way as a business to open ourselves up to the world and answer either the really tough questions or just have a sit down chat every Friday about things that are either on my mind or what I'm seeing happen in the local endurance community or the community abroad. We are going to do a chat actually about shoes in the coming weeks. So if those are some really big pressing questions, I'm actually going to wait to bring in Coach Lexi on that one. She does an awesome job and has a super huge knowledge of shoes. So I know that a good number of you had questions about nutrition. So I am going to put a few things together here and just make sure that we've got all of the little timestamps that we need. Awesome. So first and foremost, when we talk nutrition, one of the big things that I like to think about is the fuel itself. So for me, I'm personally a plant-based athlete. I've been a plant-based athlete for about 11 years now. And a lot of people like to talk about, is it this diet? Is it this that's better? When we talk endurance, there's definitely nothing that's going to hide the idea of having to utilize free fatty acid as your fuel source. But with that said, we don't see athletes going out and just eating fat for these long endurance events. Having crewed and been a part of and paced multiple 200 plus mile events with athletes, we are eating a lot of carbohydrates as well as making sure that we're eating a broad spectrum of things that contain protein, that contain fat. And we're talking about moving for not just 24 hours, but 40, 50, 60, 70, almost 80 hours for some of these 200 plus mile events. We really have to think about, what needs to be consumed by an athlete to continue moving. Yes, there is quite a bit of rest in these 200 plus mile events, but that doesn't mean that we aren't going to need carbohydrates, fat, and protein. Those building blocks are really important to making sure that we're able to continue moving. So one of the things I'll talk about, and we'll actually kind of dial back to something that most people understand, at least that are participating in this, is marathon day or marathon race nutrition. So a couple of things that really come to mind to me, and I'm going to grab the jar that I keep on my desk as far as nutrition goes, because I'm going to go out for a long run. The calories that I use are going to look pretty similar. I tend to really like to eat some more natural things. I'm a huge fan of human gel, and by no means are we sponsored by any of these companies or anything. So I'm just giving you what I like. But these are on average somewhere in the neighborhood of about 100 up to about, I think, 150 calories, maybe 125 per. And we're going to talk about a couple different things here as we kind of dive into the nutrition side of things. So let me pull a couple things out here. Ooh, never eaten this guy. So when it comes to race day nutrition, let's go all the way back to when does nutrition start to matter? And I'm going to talk in specifics here about the marathon. And there have been a lot of articles and a lot of studies done about carbohydrate loading and even doing some things as far as maybe the 2 weeks prior, you're not taking in as many carbohydrates, and then you're actually going to kind of overload your muscle glycogen by taking a large number of carbohydrates in the week of your race. And the thought there is that you're overloading. So you're going, instead of 100% of your glycogen, you're at 105, 110% of your glycogen. And that is supposed to help stimulate, your body's ability to have more on race day. So you're kind of extending your muscle glycogen and the properties there. I haven't seen that be super successful. I haven't seen that happen as much at the top of the sport, but we'd be really curious to see if anybody has, any thoughts, around that. Feel free to kind of throw some things into the chat if that is something that you're doing. But for myself, I usually look at what am I eating if I'm going to have a Saturday or a Sunday race. I really start to kind of focus in on my nutrition around Thursday or Friday. And what I'm looking for in there is making sure that I'm having my pasta, my rice, those higher carbohydrate foods. But with that, we have to have a large amount of water to be able to help process those carbs efficiently. So if we're having a huge amount of carbs the night before, sometimes when we don't have as much water, it can really make the gut feel heavy and may not process in our stomach as readily or as easily. So for me, I'm starting to probably try to take out some of the fiber in my diet on Thursday and Friday. I'm not gonna cut it out completely, but I definitely don't want to have something like a big salad the night before I'm gonna race. There's just a lot that happens in the gut, breaking down leafy greens and things like that, and it can just lead to some big stomach discomfort as we get into the race. The stomach is already in knots at the start line anyways. So for me, after 39 marathons, I have found that there is a strategy and methodology that works for me as an athlete. One thing that I like to look at is the night before, so the day before. If I have a Saturday race, my Friday, I'm gonna eat a relatively early lunch, maybe call it a brunch, and then I am going to have an early dinner around maybe 5 p.m., 4 p.m., somewhere in there. And then I'm gonna have one late night snack. So I'm kind of breaking up my meals, but I'm gonna have my largest meal a little bit earlier. Reason being, unless I'm getting up at 5 or 6 a.m. every week in my buildup to then go out and train, do my long run and things like that, my body is probably not gonna be used to having to be able to use the bathroom and do all of the things that you do before you run as easily. So I'm gonna kind of purposefully shift that cycle for myself the day before my race so that everything in my stomach has had a chance to process and I will actually wake up somewhat hungry and have a desire to eat. For me, I like to make coffee the day before in a drip pot. I like day-old coffee. It works for me. I don't need as much of it. I don't need a full cup of coffee because coffee is a diuretic. It does make you pee, but I like to wake up with coffee. It's what I do. So I will actually take day-old coffee and reheat it. It's very powerful tasting coffee. So I can just sip on that and I can kind of get my little caffeine need, my feel for that. We can talk about a caffeine taper. Once again, it's a lot like the carbohydrate taper for me. I've seen some athletes that aren't huge coffee drinkers or don't regularly drink it that have a huge effect from a caffeine taper. For some of us, if you're drinking coffee on the regular, you're just making the 2 weeks leading into your marathon a little bit more miserable. You're already tapering. Have that beer the night before, on Monday night or whatever, if it helps you relax. This is not about trying to dial in the absolutely perfect thing on one single day. You've trained 6 months, yes, for an event, but you still need to relax. You still need to kind of keep your body's rhythms. And sometimes that means waking up with a cup of coffee. That might mean half a glass of red wine the night before your race. It's not gonna hurt you. Just make sure that you're hydrating. Just make sure that you have given yourself all of the other proper things leading into the race to have success. So morning of, I'm gonna just have what I would see as my regular breakfast that I practiced having as my pre-long run breakfast. And so part of what I like to put into my training for my athletes is actually practicing the nutrition side of things. So not only are we going to use, all of these things in training, leading up to it and kind of doing workouts and specific long runs to test that nutrition strategy, we're also going to test, and excuse me here, our hydration strategy. So as we look at it, one of the biggest parts and where athletes tend to mess up is they tend to not eat enough that morning of. And we're not really going to be doing a whole lot in the way of adding glycogen to our system. We're not topping off the tank as much as we are just fulfilling our body's natural rhythm to eat something and have the ability to kind of bring our blood sugar up to a relatively good homeostasis so that we can start the race. And this is the number one thing that I see people do before a race, and it kind of drives me a little nuts, is they'll take a gel directly before the race. And the reason it drives me nuts is, this is, and I'm using goo, so goo, don't put me on blast here. This is 100 calories and there's 22 grams of carbohydrates, 7 grams of sugar. So while it's not a huge amount of sugar, because it's a gel, it is going to basically break down into our system really, really quickly. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring your blood sugar up, which is going to create an insulin response. And in those first 6, 10, 12 miles, you kind of want your body to start utilizing a little bit of that glycogen. And until you're about an hour into the race, maybe even 45 minutes into the race, you shouldn't need anything. You've had your breakfast, and that's, way more than, 22 grams of carbohydrate if you're having a piece of toast, if you're having oatmeal and things like that. So you don't need to then shove rocket fuel into your body and really spike those blood sugar levels and create an insulin response that is then going to come down as a crash. When you come down off of these things, you're not going to come down in this slow tapered fashion. We see some of these things like Genucan. There's other products out there that have a little bit slower decline in terms of the body's response to that starch or that carbohydrate, that fuel that's put in there. And so all of these are pretty much sugar, but what type of sugar they are, they're all going to kind of fall across, a ton of different things. This one, sugars, is going to actually, the carbohydrate sources here are basmati rice, bananas, honey, and a little bit of orange juice. So this is a lot of really natural stuff that your body is used to seeing a lot. When we talk about maltodextrin, water, and fructose, we'll keep an eye on fructose here, but something like this goo gel, this to me, when I take a goo gel, if I have one late in the race, it's very noticeable that I have just taken a goo gel. Again, maltodextrin, water, and then rice dextrin. So again, a lot of these dextrins are basically just sugars, broken down sugars. And then this one is evaporated cane juice, strawberry puree, brown rice syrup, milled chia, strawberry concentrate, and a little bit of coconut water. So not too many carbs from the coconut water. But we're looking at, let's go through these real quick. 23 grams of carbs. We know that this was 22 grams of carbs. 17 grams of carbohydrate in 41 gram sized gel. So this is by majority carbohydrate. Let's grab the hammer here. This one's going to be 22 grams. So we can see that these are all about 22 grams of carbohydrate. These two are going to be from maltodextrin. These two, the Spring and the Hema, are going to be from more natural, fruit purees and other carbohydrate resources. And I think it's really important that these two are definitely going to feel to your body like rocket fuel. Am I saying don't take hammer gel? Am I saying don't take goo gel? No, I'm saying use these resources really wisely. It just doesn't make sense. Your body already has its glycogen resources already tapped off. When we create a really huge spike, if we think that this is our normal homeostasis, we're going to fall below that line and kind of crash because we just asked our body to use this instead of our muscle glycogen. And now we're kind of in this hole and we're continuing to run the marathon. We're continuing to, utilize glycogen and calories. And so our body is at a disadvantage because we're going to take another gel, we're going to spike it up, and it's going to come back down. And you're never really going to be able to get back to this homeostasis, where if we really naturally just kind of let our body very slowly taper and say, hey, about 45 minutes into this thing, I'm going to take a gel and I'm going to bring it back up. And, you know, some of these, you'll figure out which ones work for you, which ones have the longest lasting effects for you. This is where each body is individual, but we're not going to have this big up, big down, which can, you know, really is utilizing these calories and carbohydrates instead of our onboard stuff. So I would say for as long as you can, most of the general nutrition plans that I'm going to give out to athletes as far as, you know, training, and this applies to, you know, the marathon all the way on up to, you know, ultra distance races. And there are definitely a couple of considerations for ultras we can talk about, but, you know, usually you're not going to take that first gel until you're about an hour in. You should be able to get through an hour of, you know, your marathon pace, if not at least 45 minutes of marathon pace, before you need to consume calories. Don't just arbitrarily put that there. I'm an eat to hunger, drink to thirst kind of guy. If you're feeling hungry, that's your body telling you that you need more. So give it what it's desiring. When it comes to that next gel, I like to see, you know, depending on your body weight, this is really going to be the limiting factor. You know, if you're in that 120 to 150 pound range, you know, a gel every 45 minutes, you know, 100 to 150 calories every 45 minutes to an hour is pretty normal. If you're less than that, you may only need about a half to, you know, 3/4 of a gel. If you're over that 150 pound mark, you're probably going to need, you know, 20% more than what's offered in just a gel. So you may be having a gel to a gel and a half every hour. So be conscious of that. You know, when you're doing, you know, your training nutrition runs, you want to finish those nutrition runs, you know, feeling like you've got enough that if you had to go the remaining distance, you know, whether you're training for a marathon or things like that, that you could get to that next fueling point without feeling like you're totally depleted. So you shouldn't finish those runs feeling completely depleted. Otherwise you under-fueled. One last thing I wanted to talk about here is eating things like this. This is Justin's maple almond butter packet. And this is 190 calories. And the serving size is 32 grams. And this is 41 grams. So they are about equal in terms of size and volume. This one's actually got a little bit more. This one's actually got a little bit less in terms of total volume here. But not all calories are created the same. This has 16 grams of fat, of which 150 calories you know, come from fat. And one thing that I think I see a lot of people doing is that they're in a marathon, they're in a half marathon, and they're like, well, I really like to eat peanut butter or something that's got a lot of fat in it because I'm a fat adapted athlete. Well, if your heart rate is over a certain point and you're pushing yourself pretty hard, you're not going to be able to, you know, process this in your gut. You're just not. Fat and protein require more blood in your stomach to process those calories efficiently. That's why all of these sports nutrition products are carbohydrates, because we can actually process carbohydrates without having to use as much blood in our gut. When we're running and we're working, the stomach is usually the first thing that our brain says, hey, we're going to pull blood away from that so that your legs and your heart and your lungs can do their job the best they can. So when it comes to, you know, taking these fats and things like that, if you're doing an ultra or a slow race where you're going to be under your aerobic threshold and you know that you're going to continuously be zone 2, zone 1, these are all right things to take because your gut is going to be able to process those things. You're going to have enough water regularly to process those things. So these are great for ultras. These are great for, you know, those long hikes or those long training runs where you know that you're not going to get your heart rate up into zone 3, zone 4. And where you're actually going to be able to be burning free fatty acid and be able to actually, your gut's going to be able to convert this stuff into usable fuel sources. Otherwise, this is going to sit in your gut and it's going to hurt. It's going to sit like a rock, and you're going to be really uncomfortable with it. And so this isn't a slam on any one of these products. This is just like a personal experience over the process of, well over 100 races, from, Ironman to ultra to, marathons. This is what's worked year after year, time after time. And it's what's worked for my athletes year after year. So really when it comes to, that nutrition, find what works. That's why you have to test. That's why I have a ton of these different things, because depending on what I'm feeling like, depending on what point in my training I am, some of this stuff works better. Sometimes I don't need as much carbohydrate. If I'm going out to train and I know I'm going to go low and slow, I'm going to throw one of these in my vest. It's perfect. It's all about what's the objective. If the goal is to run and maintain that high blood sugar and really be able to kind of maintain that focus, that hyper focus of holding on to pace, a lot of sugar is good. We didn't even talk about caffeine and all those other things that are in gels. So definitely something to consider as you are all really looking at what's the best nutrition strategy for me. I'll take a moment here to talk a little bit about the ultra side of things, and I'm going to go really ultra, 100 miles, all the way up to 200 miles. And I think one thing that really, people kind of get stuck on is that, this is my diet and this is how I have to race. And I'm by no means saying, hey, if you're vegan or very strict vegetarian, have that chicken broth. Most aid stations are going to offer, just a vegetable broth and things like that. What I'm saying is, you may not eat a lot of sugar, you may not drink soda, but be adaptable and flexible, because there are times when your body that, sitting down and you're foggy and you've come into that aid station and you pushed a little too hard that last one, or you ran out of calories. That's a time when it's okay to have half a cup of Coke to kind of bring your senses back online, and then get some real food in your body. And this is where I can't stress it enough, that when we're talking 100 to 200 miles, real food trumps anything in here. Especially when you're able to sit down for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, or longer. Some of these 200-mile races, you're sitting down for a half an hour, 35 minutes, we're changing socks, we're doing the whole thing. And you're going to be able to start really processing a large amount of calories, a large amount of fat, a large amount of protein, and it's going to kind of keep your body in rhythm, even though you're pushing those limits. With ultra considered, there's a lot more hiking and a lot more opportunity where you can kind of keep your heart rate controlled and nice and low and slow. So being able to eat real food. And I'll take a great example of a buddy that I crewed at the Stagecoach 100. Literally ate pizza pretty much the whole way through. There's a little, it's a savory thing, but it was like a day-old pizza, and we'd literally go out as Little Caesars and you just shoved it in a jacket pocket. I ended up finding one like 3 months later in a jacket. Hilarious. But that's what worked for him, and that's how he trained. We had salted potatoes and pizza. Had Coke every now and then, and we'd mix that in with like V Fuel and some other products. So haven't talked about any of the things like Genucan, the super starches, any of that stuff. But all of those are reasonable things to use if you've tested them. Just like putting on a brand new pair of shoes on race day, don't test your nutrition on race day. It will end horribly. So that's kind of my nutrition spiel when it comes to kind of looking at the whole thing in terms of calories, the kinds of sugars that we're using. One that I mentioned there was fructose. And the fructose piece here really kind of comes down to the fact that for some people that are sensitive to fructose, it can do a little bit of fermentation in the gut, especially if we're running really fast. It can be a little tough on the gut. It kind of give us a little bit of gas, which is uncomfortable. And the number one rule in running is never trust a fart. So I don't play with fructose. I don't really eat a lot of things that are really high in fructose in my diet on the daily. So I am not going to eat gels or consume them if they have fructose. In the event that I'm at mile 20 and I drop to one of my gels and I pick up one that's got fructose in it, yeah, I'm going to eat it, but I'm going to pay for it later. So that kind of ends the nutrition side of things here. When it comes to looking at the picture of winter training for us here, I'm located in Denver, Colorado. I'm taking a look outside right now, and we still have about 6 to 8 inches of wet, heavy snow on the ground. And being as it is February, we're starting to think about, is it spring yet? Groundhog said it's coming early. What are we doing for training if we can't get out on the trails? We can't do a lot of other stuff. And this is where we have to really look at and utilize one of the tools that's in front of us. And as a coach, I use TrainingPeaks. Again, this is not anything like sponsorship or anything. It is literally just the software that I use. And one of the things that I think is really valuable is TSS, and that's Training Stress Score. And really the idea of training stress in and of itself. When we're looking at being adaptable and trying to create a training plan that follows the seasons, because we don't all live in this, San Diego of 60 to 70 degrees on average all year round, where it's very comfortable and easy to train. We need to be able to go out and say, okay, I'm going to go out and ski because I can't run because it's dumping snow. I'm not talking downhill ski. I'm talking a Nordic ski. Your cross country, your skate ski, things like that. Get out on a fat bike, get into the pool. I have a bike trainer downstairs that I use all the time in the winter. And I can, get 80, 90 TSS in an hour, hour and a half somewhere in there. And that's going to allow me to have a transferable stimulus to running when it's nice out in April, May, June, July, August. That, for me, I'm looking at Pikes Peak Ascent. I know that I need to start really building up my volume and my ability because I have been injured and I can't run right now. So if I'm injured, if I can't run, what are the things that I can do to maintain or build up my TSS, my chronic training load? As it looks. So I am going to constantly get down there on the bike every day and get, the same amount of training stress, if not more training stress from the bike, so that I'm not losing my fitness. And so this is kind of a good way to kind of, do an apples to apples comparison. I know that I'm going to have to ride my bike longer to get the same training effect that I would from running. Running is a very hard thing to replace. Running is kind of the, you can go out for an hour and it's the best workout you can get. I can ride for 2 hours, 3 hours, and I'm starting to kind of get to the same place I would for a harder hour-long run. But I'm going to accrue more TSS on the bike just because that's how the TSS calculation is created. So we're going to kind of look at that CTL piece and really try to use TrainingPeaks to kind of see, are we on track for where we want to go? Because at the end of the day, a volume of training stress is still going to change the body. We're still going to get the adaptation that we want. We're still going to burn calories, and we're still going to break down muscle. We're still going to use glycogen. We're still going to, have our heart rate zones that matter. We're still going to be able to be in our endurance zones, and we're going to be able to be at that threshold, sub-threshold, even anaerobic phases with other sports. So we can still hit those systems. We can still work the heart and the lungs to get the adaptation that we may not be able to elicit by running. I can't load my ankle right now on the treadmill or outside. The trails are just far too snowy, icy, and dangerous to be out on. So I'm going to get on the bike and I can do a really hard anaerobic workout. I can do sub-threshold, threshold intervals, and I can still get my zone 2 work in, that long, slow base, so that when I am healed and I am ready to get back out there, I'm not starting fresh with just, basal metabolic systems that haven't been stressed at all for the last 6 to 8 weeks. So that's how I'm kind of looking at my winter training. The other big thing for me, and if you know me, if you follow me on Instagram or any of those other places, I like to talk about strength training a lot. And it's one of the things that I am doing more and more with both my youth athletes, but my adult athletes as well. And that is just getting in the weight room. Get comfortable moving weight. Know basic movements. Know how to deadlift and pull weight from the floor. Know how to, if you can't, do it with a bar and get, do it clean. Be able to do a push press and get weight overhead. All of these things are about power. They're also about, working things like small muscle groups with bands. So if you're having IT band pain and things like that, now is your time. I can't hammer that enough, because when you're in the depths of training and you've already broken down, your legs in a really hard workout, you're not going to be able to then go and perform in the weight room and build muscle. You're only further breaking down a system that's already been hit. So you're going to build even deeper, harder fatigue to get out of. So now is your time to build some basic systems, touch on that anaerobic, touch on those VO2 max systems, touch on that endurance work, but also kind of build that entire support structure underneath everything so it all kind of lifts in the weight room. If you guys have any questions on that, email us, coaches at Lifelong Endurance directly. That is kind of our way to be able to field questions. This is not just for our athletes. This is kind of for anybody. If you have questions, this is where you guys can bring them in. I'm going to take about 5 minutes here to see if we've had any questions come in, either through our Instagram, our Facebook, or things like that. So pardon me as I take a look, away from you guys here for just a minute. Let's see what kind of questions we have. All right. Hopefully someone's got some questions here. We do this every Friday, so you know where to find us. Nothing on the gram. Y'all let me down. It's all right. It's all right. Man, talk about 9 degrees. Feeling my buddy Michael here. He posted in the athletes and coaches group. Between yesterday and today, it's been one of those stretches here in the Midwest where you don't feel like doing anything outside. Kudos to anyone else that's had a week like that and still knocked out their workouts. 9 degrees. That's rough. Getting out in 9 degrees is really, really hard. But I think it's one of those things that when I come back from a run in, single digits, and by the time I get my layers off, I'm happy that I've accomplished it. But it's that first mile. And I think the first mile really tells us a lot, but also very little about the, forthcoming miles. That first mile is always going to be hard. But how we choose to move from mile 1 to mile 2 definitely is where this muscle between our 2 ears, we really have to flex and say, okay, you know what? I'm out here. I put all this gear on. Let's get this done. Let's move this forward. Let's kick some ass in this workout. And it's hard. It's hard to do a workout outside in 9 degrees. I think really the big thing is one, the safety factor. You don't want to scar your lungs with really cold air. So doing a lot of high aerobic work or even a workout other than an easy run outside probably isn't the smartest thing to do. I'd move that in on the treadmill. When it comes to, doing even your easy runs and you're seeing that on 15, 20, 30 seconds per mile slower because it's cold, that's kind of to be expected. You have more layers on. They're restrictive layers. You're not able to open up your stride as much. If it's snowy, if it's slippery, you're being more conscious and maybe even subconsciously shortening that stride. So don't be, alarmed if you see that when your pace outside is much different than when you're in a shorts and singlet in that hot gym, rolling away on the treadmill. So just some things to kind of consider there to kind of keep your mental status, keep those things firing away. Let's take a look here. Pre-run fueling we talked about. We talked race day nutrition. we can definitely talk a little bit about the recovery side of things. All right, I think we covered all of the different social media resources. I'm going to open up the email inbox here and see if we have any fun questions. All right, I'm going to talk about a few things in terms of recovery, and if we don't have anybody else, I will end things early. But I don't have any of my tools here. I'll have to find tools. But I think one of the big things that I want to talk about is icing, heat, topical things. And then I also want to look at the different types and kinds of rollers. I don't know if you guys have seen the new Roll Recovery R4. Looks pretty interesting. Can't wait to get my hands on one of those. I like their R8 roller. I keep one in my bag, especially before, races and things like that. Sometimes it's just nice to kind of get your legs opened up. But let's talk a little bit about recovery first of all, in terms of directly after a workout. As an athlete, I think it can be hard to eat directly after a really hard effort. Especially for a marathon, for me, the last thing I want to do is put something in. I feel a little sick to my stomach. If I pushed it really hard, or if it was a particularly hot day, the last thing I want to think about eating or putting in my body is a chocolate milk. But it is kind of one of those things that I will force down. Even though I don't drink a lot of dairy or consume a whole lot of it, it's got sugar, it's chocolate milk. Milk has a good bit of lactose, so it's got sugars in there as well. I'm getting a little bit of fat, milk fat, and then there's a little bit of protein in there. So it's a good way to kind of help start that recovery. But it's usually about 200 to 300 calories for a full fat chocolate milk. And that's a good amount of calories to get in. If I can get that and a banana, I'm getting a little bit of potassium. If I'm a little bit dehydrated, can kind of help balance me out after, a hard effort. If I come home, or if I can't get home, ideally you're going to eat within, a small snack, 200 to 300 calories. And then within 90 minutes, you want to have a full meal, like, 600, 700, 800 plus calories, within 90 minutes of finishing a hard effort or a workout, or a race. You just need to get those back. Otherwise you're really, delaying your body's, normal recovery process. If you've ever, finished a run and been tired and you took a nap and you woke up, you can be so sore for those next couple of days because your body didn't have what it needed to do its full recovery. And that cannot feel so great. When it comes to, looking at, different things in terms of foam rolling and things like that, there's a lot of that what we're doing is that when we, and it's such a high and basic level, that when we work out, we create these micro tears, these muscle tears, and they kind of create these gaps. We have this tearing if the fiber is normally aligned, and we work out really hard and we stress and strain, we can kind of get some misalignment in those fibers. And what can happen there is we can create adhesion. So, we talk about knots or muscles in our muscles. And what we're doing when we're going in there and we're getting massage is we're kind of, getting everything, kind of realigned. We get some lengthening in there. And we're trying to kind of realign those fibers. And, we have new muscle there. So we're trying to kind of break things down, get some blood flow in it. So if we have those big knots, we're trying to break up all of the things that kind of held those slightly micro-torn muscles together. And it's like it's like breaking up the tissue in there. We're trying to break up the knot. So when we're going in there and we're foam rolling and our legs are tight, we're going in there and we're kind of smoothing all of that out. So whether that's like one of those stick rollers, a foam roller, the R8, or even like one of those guns, we're just kind of trying to kind of break up that tissue, and we're really kind of tenderizing our muscles in a way. I wouldn't take the tender hammer that you use for your steak to your legs, but those percussive you know, guns and things like that, the reason they feel good is it loosens everything up in our legs and kind of breaks up those adhesions. When it comes to topical applications, on a handful of occasions I've used like CBD creams and things like that, but honestly, I don't feel anything, man. That's just me. You know, everybody's different. I actually really like, and I wish that I had it here with me. I don't know if I have it. I do. This is one of my favorites. This is just Tiger Balm. And I've, you know, been using this for probably 10 plus years. It's kind of like the hot of icy hot. And it's just one of those things that I like to put on my legs. I don't put it on before I race or anything, but it's just one of those that after I finish, you know, a shower and I've got something that's not feeling quite right or my legs are really tight, I just kind of put that on, and, you know, it's got a little bit of menthol, a little bit of camphor in it, and it just feels good on my legs. And so I think the placebo effect of, hey, that feels good, is enough for me on that. And maybe that's what CBD cream does for everybody else. But to me, it just kind of feels like I'm putting lotion on my skin, whereas I actually feel something with the Tiger Balm. I like to use this for massage as well. Just feels good to kind of really get in there with it. As far as icing and heating, you know, there's a study comes out every 2 months, it seems. It says icing is bad, heating is good. You know, honestly, if I get a bruise and I really whack my ankle on a rock or do something like that, I'm gonna ice it up. That feels good for me. And I'm still gonna get some swelling that's gonna happen. I think one of the things that when it comes to an injury and, you know, or things like that, is people automatically go and reach for the ibuprofen. They reach for an NSAID, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. And we actually really, I don't want to tell anybody not to take ibuprofen or not take painkillers. If you're in pain and you need them, take them. But if it's something like you hit your ankle or things like that, there's a certain amount of, you know, one, get it checked out if it's really bad. But number two, we want that swelling. We want that inflammation process, because that's actually helping protect whatever it is that we've done. When things kind of grow and we get that ugly green-blue color, it's for a reason. Now, once we, you know, have gotten past the point of the initial pain and we're trying to kind of get back into working out and get back into our normal, you know, rhythm, what we have to end up doing is kind of go in there and get more blood flow to the area. So compression socks, you know, getting some massage and kind of almost irritating that area just enough that we're going to get some, you know, blood flow again. We're going to kind of see, you know, a little bit of redness in the skin, and we're going to kind of try to help get some blood flow to that area. Especially when we talk about like fingers and feet, we tend to see a lot of injuries in the feet and lower body. And the reason they take so long to come back from is they're the furthest from the heart. So we can't, you know, it's very hard to evacuate some of the, you know, extra stuff that's happening down there, all that fluid, all that buildup, all that old blood. And it's why our hands and feet also get cold the soonest, because they're the furthest from the heart. We're not, you know, by the time that warm blood circulates and gets down there, you know, there's a lot that happens between the foot and the heart. So just one thing to really consider when it comes to heating and cooling, I'm going to tell you, you know, do what feels good. I wouldn't say that there's one that's better than the other. I personally hate ice baths for after. I did them a lot during Ironman when I was using my quads a lot more, so it felt good for large muscle groups. But when I'd finish a run, I really want to take a nap, and then I'm going to kind of get up and kind of foam roll and stretch and kind of open my body. So kind of moving from, you know, multiple sports into one, where I'm constantly using the same muscle group over and over, like I am in running. I'm personally going to use a foam roller and stretch, or even go to the pool, things like that. So just some thoughts on recovery there. I haven't seen any other questions come in. We're at about 47 minutes here. So if you guys have any other questions, shoot them over to us, coaches@lifelongendurance.com. Otherwise, I'll look forward to seeing you guys next week. Thanks.